come once again to discuss things.
Excited man, if I've ever heard one. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I'm Super2. Joining me today is...
Hey, what's up? I'm that Matt kid.
Yay. And today we're continuing our Batman Origins series by talking about two books that I didn't realize this at the time. They're very different eras, but they both are stories that came out of the Legends of the Dark Knight series. I was a bit surprised by that one.
Yeah, I was too. When I was looking at it, I was like, this is like literally the exact same series, but like years apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is kind of fun.
Yeah, so we're talking about Batman Prey and Batman Snow. Apparently he prayed for snow when it came. Anyway, so yeah, we got like this is, Prey is Legends of the Dark Knight number 11 to 15, and that was in like the early 90s, and Snow is... I wish they were
192 to 196.
Okay, thanks. So that's like, yeah,
that's 2005.
2005, alright. So there is quite a bit of distance between these stories. But, I don't know, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about. I really wish I'd read a couple more of these things or reread them before I'd doing this, because I really think I'd restructure the order in which we read a lot of these stories. Because... Snow, I feel, would fit better with what we were talking about with, like, Poison Ivy and Man-Bat a couple weeks ago. And Prey would fit a lot better, like, right after the Joker, before you get to, like, the Riddler and stuff.
Now, the Joker book you guys read was The Man Who Laughs, right? Because that was before I...
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Like, I'd definitely timeline it Prey after Man Who Laughs, because I feel Man Who Laughs is a really important thing that, like, the Joker's the first freak he deals with in any way. But I don't know, that's a little fuzzy, because Hugo Strange, while freaky, isn't on the same level as the Joker.
He's really not. Hugo Strange is... I guess, are we going to talk about the Prey first?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I mean, Hugo Strange is a character, a Batman villain that I've never had a ton of attachment to. But I like that we open with him essentially being almost the J. Jonah Jameson of the Batman universe, where he's this psychologist, he's going on these talk shows, just talking shit all day long. And in the same way that J. Jonah Jameson kind of gets to Pete, I like how we see that it kind of bothers Bruce, not only how much he turns people against him, but how much inside he thinks he sees like kind of the sliver of truth in what Hugo Strange is saying. And then timeline wise, there's a lot of cool stuff with like him working on the Batmobile. Like we actually see him working on like a prototype Batmobile and stuff like that in this. So it does follow that very naturally. And this is kind of a turning point where now that these freaks are out there, there's going to be more people talking about the Batman like he's real and not like he's this mythical thing. So it makes sense that now is the time where someone would be really trying to understand the psychology of this, person that we're starting to accept might be real.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, when we think about the timeline of it, it's a really weird one. And this is just kind of the problem you run into with comics, where in a vague way, it all kind of works, but once you try to get specifics, things don't. For example, Jim Gordon has gray hair. And, like, I liked that everything else we read that was a year one story up to this point, Jim Gordon still had his ginger hair. And, I don't know, it's just disappointing. And I think Snow did it too, didn't it? Where, yeah, Gordon's in Snow and he's got gray hair. And it's like, man, or practically white by the time you get to Snow. So, like, little stuff like that, but then also, you mentioned the car, and, like, one of the cool things we talked about in, like, the Poison Ivy story and stuff was that, you know, the Batcave still looked very rudimentary, that he was still, like, working on the car or talking about the idea of getting a car and stuff. And so you kind of want to fit Prey in earlier because it's dealing a lot more with, like, the psychological side of Batman, and his effect on the world is beginning to be shown, but it's not as, like, grand as it will become yet. But by the time you get to, like, Ivy and stuff, that's when, like, you get to the really weird, freaky villains, and that's where it is starting to show. And I don't know, it's a little disappointing in that regard. So, but I think the stories, the character journey still works.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, because, I mean, this is clearly a Batman who's kind of emotionally, he's still, like, how do I kind of put this? He's still early in his mental and emotional journey into becoming Batman. And so I think that Hugo Strange is actually a good choice for an early Batman story, because here's someone who can essentially kind of rattle Bruce a little bit on that more emotional and psychological level. And I think that that's kind of an interesting thing to do with an early days Batman story, who he's still kind of working out what it means to be committed to this life. And then you have this person come along who's basically trying to call him out and challenge all of his convictions and just say, well, he's clearly dealing with some sort of psychological childhood trauma, and it's kind of making Bruce almost not question necessarily, but it feels like a very personal attack on him because of how close to the mark Hugo Strange is able to get at times. And so it's this story that kind of makes Batman almost question where he is in this journey to become the Dark Knight. And I think that's interesting. And it's interesting that we juxtapose that with Hugo Strange, who has this almost fetishization. I can't say that
Fetishistic?
word.
Fetish?
Fetishistic. Yeah, this fetishistic obsession with Batman on some level, because clearly he dresses up in the suit. He talks about how it must make him feel so powerful to be dressed like this, and I think that's a really kind of interesting moment when he puts the suit on and he's like, I can imagine how this must make him feel, and you can almost kind of picture how that gives Bruce that extra strength because of how powerful he feels in that suit and things like that. And so there's a lot that's interesting here that I ended up kind of enjoying more than I expected to, being, again, not really a massive Hugo Strange fan.
Yeah, have you ever read this one before?
I've not. I know of it because Hugo Strange in the bat suit is kind of a famous thing in the Batman comics. I've never read it. I mean, I enjoyed it. I liked, and I liked the art in this is like classic, what I think of like classic 90s Batman art. It's just it just has a mood all of its own. So I enjoyed it for sure. You know, it's still not my favorite thing in the world when it comes to Batman, but I've never read it before. It made me appreciate Hugo Strange a little bit more than I had previously. And yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, what'd you think of the doll thing, the sex doll thing that they got going on with Hugo Strange in here?
Hugo Strange, such a fucking neckbeard. he's got this scene where he gets pissed off at this woman he's like kidnapped. He's like, you women are all the same. No man is good enough for you unless you're...
Aw, man, you cut out. Boo. You cut out during an awesome rant. I'm sad. Aww.
Let me reprise that. Okay. He basically has this moment where he's got this woman kidnapped, and he's just like, you women are all the same. You don't care about any man unless he's the Batman. And it's like, that's some like our neckbeards shit. Like he like fetishizes women and the power that Batman must have over women and you know the power that being Batman would give him socially, to the point where he doesn't even view women as real anymore. He views them as these things that he hates, that these objects that gravitate towards people of power in society. And so he has this doll because it's something that he can control. It's it feels almost too relevant to just fucking like nice guy neckbeard culture of today. And I actually really liked that angle just because it's like, man, Hugo Strange they were on their shit when they were diagnosing kind of this complex that he has.
Yeah, no, like that's kind of what I was gravitating toward too, because it definitely seems like there's this idea that Hugo Strange is like this very weak person who's as you said before, fetishizing Batman as the power fantasy, right? Like
Exactly.
He's got this ability to psychoanalyze him and like, oh, he is a victim of trauma, da 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 da. But yet he still like fantasizes on about the power that being Batman gives, and clearly craves it because he doesn't get that kind of recognition, that kind of power in his own life. And I think that is a really interesting take to present to comic fans, particularly comic fans in the 90s. Though, do you feel some of that gets muddled by... I mean, it's drawings of women in comics. I kind of know what to expect at this point, especially when we're talking late 80s into the 90s. With just, like, the amount of sexualization of women, no matter the context here. Like, I mentioned the sex doll. I'm like, okay, I guess it makes sense that would be overly sexualized. But, like, you got Catwoman, you got the kidnapped victim, who's just, like, constantly... Like, she's kidnapped in her bra and panties, and then she's just... Every scene after that with her is just, like, very, sexily drawn and stuff. I'm like, oh, yeah, she wanted to be kidnapped. Kind of. Yeah,
I mean, there's a shot of Catwoman in silhouette where you see nipple, like,
and it's that like, one.
Oh yeah, no, it happens. It's there. I mean, obviously it's in silhouette, so they can avoid it. But you see
flipping.
You see some tasteful side boob in fucking, what is it? Issue 13, page 16. I don't know what it would be in the trade, but like. I'm of two minds about that. I generally don't mind. Like, we've talked about it before. Like, I'm a big fan of things like hack slash and things like that. I would call myself a very sex positive person when it comes to fictional works. So I certainly don't have a problem with it, but there's a line to be drawn there, right? When it's a sexualized character with a lot of agency versus this is gratuitous and not there to serve any sort of story purpose. It's just there to be gratuitous.
Like the hot tub scene kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this story has a line to walk because Dr. Hugo Professor Strange is a man who's very, I guess, almost sexually stunted in his understanding of women and views them as these, clearly as like sex objects to an extent. And so to some degree, I think an amount of that is kind of pertinent to what the story's trying to do. But at the same time, it's hard to figure out how much of it is necessary and how much of it is just, why did we need all of the women shown in this book to have a scene where they're half naked,
right? Yeah, like that's the thing is like, and I tend to think about it, it's not even, it should be a mitigating factor, but it in fact makes it worse when it's not even intentional anymore. I think that's just the way it is, and that's how ingrained it is in the medium. Because I feel like, like with Hugo Strange being this kind of fucking beta male.
I know. Love
it. Like, it's just, there should be some stuff. And I think the idea of a sex doll is a really good way to exemplify that. I particularly like the scene where he puts the Batman cowl on the sex doll, because then he wants to fuck Batman.
I know.
Like,
yeah, there's a lot
that's
of imagery.
what he's trying to do in the whole book is just he's trying to assert his power over what he perceives as an alpha male, and he's like, oh no, he's not really an alpha. He just thinks he is, but he's got this trauma, and I can deconstruct that, and I can manipulate others, and I'm the real alpha kind of thing going for him here.
Yep, exactly.
I think that use of it is fine, like particularly with the sex doll. But yeah, it's just every woman we see in here, particularly when what do they call him, Night Stalker?
I don't know, generic 90s ninja dude.
Yeah, like there's that fight scene with him and Catwoman, and like he throws her on the ground, and like, yeah, Catwoman's wearing a skin-tight outfit. There's only so much you can do with it. But if you look on page 18 of, I believe this is issue 3, the trade actually has the same page numbers as the issues. It's weird.
Oh, that is weird.
Yeah. Like, if you look at page 18 of issue 3, Catwoman's all, like, sprawled out on the ground. I'm like, it's just distracting.
Yep.
I
agree.
I don't like stuff like that. I feel it gets boring. It reduces the quality of the storytelling to a degree. I always hear artists and stuff talk about, like, they don't get enough credit for what they bring to a story, and I'm like, yeah, but at the same time, you get a lot of passes because of shit like this. So do you really want us to talk about the art more and what you're choosing to present? Because maybe Doug Monick, when he wrote the scene with the kidnapped woman, was like, she's in her bra and panties and she looks really sexy as she's tied to the bedpost. Or maybe that was just the artist's choice. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I don't have the script for this. I can't tell. But, like, it's one of those things I think about a lot, where I'm like, how often does the art actively hinder the story sometimes?
Yeah, I agree. Especially with what the story is trying to accomplish with Hugo's. I mean, when the art is antithetical to the villain's view on women, or rather when the art, I guess, almost supports the villain's views on women, that's when you have to kind of sit back for a minute, because you've got a villain who views women as almost sex objects, and so you would think that the story on some level would try to combat that, and then it just kind of doesn't. And, at least with the art anyways, and you get almost this, I don't know, I don't want to use like a fancy term and be like, oh, it's cognitive dissonance, but it is weird.
No, I agree. And then there's other stuff in this, though, that I do want to talk about. I feel like I'm ragging on the book, but it's weird when you can see those kind of missed opportunities, because you mentioned, like, oh, this book presents the villain as thinking of women in this very, like, particular way about what they think, how they're only attracted to, like, this type of man kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's such a missed opportunity, because Catwoman's in this book, and she serves, relatively speaking, a pretty minor role. And it just seems like the pieces are all there. If Catwoman played a bigger role in the book, then you could probably work out that issue a bit better on the page, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I hate to, like, rewrite the story, but that does occur to me. Let's get a little more positive, because I feel we have been maybe a little too negative on it. So we talked about the psychological plot. How did you feel about the way Batman kind of resolves it, particularly because, you know, quote-unquote, in this era, this is his first time dealing with, like, the death of his parents in costume being used against him kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see. Hugo Strange has some lines where he talks about how, essentially Batman is kind of defined by this one night, and that it's something that he'll not really be able to get past, essentially, is kind of, I think, the way it's phrased in here. If I'm trying to remember what page it was. I don't think I'm going to be able to find what page it is. But yeah. And so the idea of that being something that Batman has to face early in his career, like I said, someone who's essentially calling him out on almost a more personal level. I think that works really well as a challenge for Batman. And I think also seeing him kind of push past it by essentially, I mean, he essentially kind of sequesters himself in his cave for a little bit, and then kind of coming out sort of reforged anew, I guess to say, with this, I don't know, this kind of trial by fire where he kind of goes through this baptismal, comes back out of his cave and is kind of ready to go again. I mean, I think it's all good stuff, honestly. I don't have like super specific thoughts on exactly the way he deals with it, other than just to say that I think it's a good challenge for him to face, and I like that it just comes down to a reaffirmation of what he's come to believe about what he has to do.
No, I gotcha. I really like the conclusion with Hugo Strange. The fact that like it's all been a psychological attack, and it's all based on Hugo Strange getting like really good guesses in, and he does like, you know, make Batman go catatonic for a moment, and then I just love, it's like the ultimate. I really live for those Batman moments where he triumphs and it's always the most simple shit. I love those so much. So the fact that he just gets the strength to go back to confront Hugo Strange and just fucking lies. It's like the best shit to me. Just like, oh, by the way, Batman, had any good dreams lately? And he like finally comes out of shouting and goes, I never dream. Oh, come on. Don't try to deny it. I know the sight of your dead mother and father must have. My mother and father live in Paraguay. It's just fucking, like, so blatant, and it immediately wrecks his ass. Like, just the way Strange's face is drawn, you just see the whole veneer of this ultra confident, like, he's even got a fucking martini like he's a goddamn Bond villain. It just all drops away in that moment.
And I think what I like about it is because it almost ties back to what we were saying with Hugo Strange and the type of people in modern society that we kind of see a reflection of in Hugo Strange, because these are people whose worldview can be instantly shattered by anything that contradicts it. And they just go into this denial about it. So to have Batman just show up and just simply say, you're wrong, and really just be bullshitting him.
It's the bat poker
He
face.
essentially... Say what?
It's the bat poker face.
Exactly. He essentially goes into this state of just being just mentally exhausted from what Hugo Strange has been throwing at him in terms of basically calling out Batman's psychosis and Bruce having to deal with the fact that, you know, someone is on that level and really able to sort of see through him. And then he just has to essentially bluff his way out of it and just confront the Doctor and just make him essentially doubt himself, right? Because I mean that's what Hugo Strange does. He makes Bruce doubt himself, and so that's all Bruce has to do with him is just make him doubt that his assumptions about Bruce were correct, and that's it. It just unwinds him the same way it did to Bruce, only Hugo had invested so much into what his analysis of the Batman was. He invested so much of who he is into being able to psychoanalyze Batman that the moment he's presented with something that challenges that, it kind of unravels him.
Absolutely. There's two characters I want to still talk about. I want to talk about Gordon and Court, the Night Scourge. Do you want to do one over the other first?
Night Scourge looks like a Sega Genesis side-scroller character.
And not like a boss or anything, just like generic thug that you have to beat up on your way, right?
Night Scourge looks like a character from like the original Ninja Gaiden game that someone had to like, okay, he's like 12 pixels. What would this look like in real life? Night Scourge is like an early draft of a Mortal Kombat character that didn't end up making it into the game. I like, to be honest with you, I like the idea that Hugo Strange is essentially taking this other person who's got this massive fucking, I hate the Batman. And Hugo is just like, well, you could always do something about it. And just kind of getting this guy to go full tilt into sort of what Hugo Strange is selling to him. Unfortunately, I do think he's a victim of 90s art, and it does throw me off, and it takes me out of the story a little bit. But I think the ridiculousness of his costume is also kind of part of what they're doing with him. But I did like him as this antagonistic force that Hugo was able to sort of wield like a blunt instrument.
Mm-hmm. I think it becomes from like, okay, it's a Batman comic and we're doing all these big psychological things, but we still need some kind of physical threat present. I think that's why Night Scourge is in this book. And on some level, I'm like, okay, I agree with that. But let me tell you what I think. I think that Court has no training with a goddamn sword. And there's no reason he should have one, or I have no idea where he got it, or anything like that. So it kind of undermines the threat. And, his whole thing is, oh, I'm a cop, I want to do stuff right by cops. And, like, he is a bit of a meathead, even Gordon admits that, but I also like the idea, I like where Court's character starts. I think he has a really, really interesting starting point. And I like the idea that Gordon's like, okay, I need someone I can trust, but not someone that's smart enough to figure things out. So I'm going to pick this guy. And I thought that was a really, really cool, really interesting place to start them. And so if I were to rewrite Prey, I think the two major things I would change are, one, I would give Catwoman a bigger role in order to directly butt heads against Strange and his view of women, because I don't think we really do enough with that. And two, I would change Court to Lyle Bolton. I'd make him Lockup.
Yes, I love Lockup.
Yeah, I think he's like a really underused and kind of an interesting idea for a character. And I think, like, this role that they have for him would work so well. Like, oh, I kind of like what Batman's doing, but he doesn't go far enough with it. And, like, I'm not going to be judge, jury, and executioner, but, like, we see that these criminals, they always get out. And you don't even have to start with, like, supervillains for that, because Gotham's got all this corruption problem. I don't know, there's a lot built in that could have really worked for that. Mm-hmm. And as far as an arsenal goes, don't give him a fucking sword. Give him, like, police stuff. Give him, like, some fucking handcuffs. Give him a beanbag gun. Give him SWAT equipment. That
like
looks...
riot gear that's kind of more of that's a little bit more exaggerated.
I know. Shit like that would look really good on page, and it would dovetail nicely with some of the themes going on in Batman Year One, with the idea of Batman versus, like, the corrupt state, of course the corruption isn't just people getting their palms greased, but it's like, militaristic cops that are assholes too. That's like a big part of it too. So I think that would have worked really well if we take out Court or just insert Lyle Bolton or make him closer to Lyle Bolton as a character.
Especially because you have Batman. It's kind of interesting because early Batman, you always have that interesting dynamic of he's fighting villains and cops. Because like once you get to late series Batman, usually his encounters that are hostile with police are a little bit more few and far between. But early Batman is always dealing with the fact that he also has to fight or get away from cops. And he even talks about that. He's like, I did this to fight criminals, but now I'm fighting the police and criminals, and I can't do it. Like, I can't do both. And I think that's really interesting when you have a character like Hugo Strange who's turning the public against Batman, and then you have characters like Court, and I think Gordon even says it. He talks about how he's like, maybe Court wasn't the perfect choice because he really hates Batman and it's becoming a crusade for him, and that's just very dangerous.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I guess let's use that as a transition and talk about Gordon's role in this, because I find the relationship that's been building up between Batman and Gordon in all these early years stories to be really fascinating. And it's kind of like, I think that is the thing that is 100% built on the back of Miller. More than anything else, of like Gordon actually having a character as opposed to just being the guy that calls in Batman. And I think that's just really interesting to me, because I like how these early days stories play with the fact that, like, listen, any police officer working with a vigilante outside the law is probably not a good thing, and we should maybe handle it with some moral complexity and ambiguity. And I really like how that plays with Gordon here, where, like, he'll help him, but he's not going to just go full in for him. He doesn't trust him that much. It's like, yeah, you saved my kid, but still gotta have some kind of accountability here. This is getting ridiculous. And the kind of the theme we're building to, and the theme I really like that we're building to, is it's slowly going... He's slowly getting more and more trustful because things keep going right, but he's worried that sometime things are going to go wrong. And that's what's gonna happen when we get to Long Halloween.
Yep.
Yeah. That's the thing I'm really excited for, to see how that turn plays.
He's got a great exchange with Batman where he's basically saying, like, look, we both want to make the city better, but you're going about it the wrong way. And Batman's like, just, do you actually believe that? And Gordon's just like, well, I believe that you're breaking the law, but damn it, you work. And it's like, that's kind of the best encapsulation of this early dynamic that they have set up here, where Batman realizes that the only way he gets to the point where he's not having to fight off the cops every time he goes out is by trying to make an ally with a member of the police force that he does trust. And so I do like that we've seen that, and we even get to the point where this is where they introduce, like, the bat signal, and it was cool to see that actually be something that we see develop in the same way we see the Cave develop, in the same way that we see Batman develop as a force in Gotham, as a presence in Gotham. We're also seeing other things develop, like his relationship with Gordon, like we see the signal coming. And it's those types of little details that make these more fun to read, kind of combined with each other as opposed to, separately.
I really love the panel where we see the bat signal go on for the first time. I thought that was freaking awesome. It was just so cool. And, like, Court starts freaking out about it, too, and so it's like, what was that? I'm like, yeah, the first time the signal goes on would be like a whoa kind of moment when you really think about it. So, because so often we just, like, it's kind of just there, it's like, oh yeah, and I set this up. We've rarely seen the origin for it, which is cool.
We don't, and we get to see kind of, as far as this story is concerned, the first canonical meeting of Gordon turning on the light, wearing a trench coat in the wind of Gotham, and then Batman showing up on the rooftop to talk with him. And that's just, like, an iconic piece of Batman mythos and of Batman iconography. And so it was cool to see kind of that happen for what is, the first time in the chronology according to this story.
I wonder when the first instance of that happening was.
I don't know, because that's one of my favorite things is Jim and Batman meeting on a rooftop to talk about crime.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other thing that's worth talking about too is, Hugo Strange is the first reoccurring Batman villain in real life, and so it is kind of interesting to get him in here as just like this early days kind of story, because conceptually he should be a guy that either comes around really early on or really late in the game when you think about it. Of like, because that's when, like, people's interest in Batman should be at their highest, is like when he's kind of become a bit of an icon or when he's first starting out.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was cool. You want to go ahead and transition and start talking about Snow? Did you have anything else you wanted to mention with Bray?
I'm trying to think of another funny thing that Court looks like in his costume, but I can't think of anything. So yeah, let's move on.
He looks like Shredder in the first TMNT movie.
It just feels like ninjas. Like, oh man, ninjas are cool, right? This is the 90s. Ninjas are really cool right now. It's just like he's got like 2 katanas. And he's got like 2 small like swords in the front of his outfit also. Yeah, okay, we can move on. But
Okay. Batman Snow. So more Legends of the Dark Knight. This is the Mr. Freeze origin piece, also set in the early days. Mr. Freeze is one of those characters who I wouldn't initially think of for early days, but I think the story makes this work. I'm going to start out, though, with my hot take on this. The artist and the writer clearly never talked before, because I've never seen a book that is more artistically at odds with its script than I have in this. I feel really bad about this, because when I picked this book up at the comic shop all those years ago, the store employee said, "Oh man, Seth Fisher, yeah, he was really going places, but he died shortly after this came out."
Oh my god, wow.
Yeah, I feel really bad saying this. I fucking hate the art in this book. I literally, I cringe when I read this book for the art, which is really disappointing, because I think there is a really interesting story here, but it's just so at odds with the art that it's really, really hard to read.
Yeah, I have things to say about the story and how it does Mr. Freeze, and some of the things I like and don't like with how it handles Batman. I think the art is a really natural place to start with this one, though, because even if you like this art style, it is so radically different than what you typically see with Batman. To be honest with you, I had the same initial reaction when I first started reading it. I hated the art. And even rereading it a couple times and skimming through it a couple times, I don't know that I love the art, but there are pieces that make me really like it. Like, for example, in one of the early issues, I think in the first issue, there's a scene of Gordon and Batman talking on a roof, and the way that the artist was able to do Gotham, the way he draws Batman's cape to be that huge, giant, massive, flowing cape that I love. There's a lot of stuff in here that I really like. And then you get to the next page, and Gordon is literally red-faced and has smoke coming out of his ears. And you're just kind of like, huh. And the art style is certainly a choice. I don't know that it fits the material. I don't know that it really fits Batman in general. It's interesting, though. And there are moments when I really like it. Like, there's another panel in the first issue where we see Batman kind of sitting on a desk in the Batcave. And I just really like how that looks with all the papers spread everywhere and just the design of the Batcave. So there are moments in here where the art really does it for me. And then there are moments where I really don't care for it. So it's definitely got a very polarizing art style. I can imagine people picking this up and either loving or hating the art.
See, I will trade you any good panel for literally any panel where we see someone's teeth. It's so distracting. I've never seen someone draw such it looks like everyone in this book has dentures that they haven't gotten used to yet, and so they're constantly moving their lips around, and it's just so unnatural. Every time I just flip through pages here and I just find really disgusting ass imagery that legit bothers me.
No, yeah, that's fair.
And it's I think it's almost trying to be too realistic with a style that looks like it's meant to be more for fantasy or something.
Yeah.
Because you know what art I really like? Are the panels where we see Freeze talking to his dead wife. Those are actually pretty cool and trippy and fun, and I feel like that's what the artist did. I feel like that's what their background was in. But just when I see them try to do this in between stuff is when I'm just like, No, thank you. No, thank you at all.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. Because I mean, I agree with you. Like when he first gets himself frozen, and you kind of get that first scene of Nora showing up in his head, and she's got the crazy like yellow dress, and his skin is all frozen, and his hair is all crazy from just being frozen in place. That all looks really interesting, and I even think I think it's the last page of issue 1, or maybe of issue 2. Yeah, the last page of issue 2 of issue 193, when Freeze is, you know, it's just a close up of his face, and he's got all the equipment around him, and he says like "yes, dear" or something like that. Like, oh man, that looks fucking awesome as shit. So I think there are moments. I think there are moments of really cool art in this, because it's such a. I think what attracts me to it is that it is such a distinct style that when it works, I feel like it does work. But when it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. I think that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, just like I really can't help but feel like the artist just, this isn't really his medium of story. That's kind of what I get. Like this, if this were like a not a Sam Keith, if this were like a Neil Gaiman book, like if this were a Sandman dreaming story or something, I think this art style could really fit, because, you know, it's just that everyone's a little too soft. Everything's a little too... It looks like the bad stuff that I don't like about Frank Quietly's art.
That's fair. Actually, yeah, that's really fair, because I didn't think about that, but that is actually a pretty decent comparison.
Like, I like Frank Quietly when he... But I don't love him all the time. There's elements of his stuff that just doesn't work for me. And this feels like all of those moments that don't work for me.
I mean, this for me... I think that's a really apt comparison, because when I think of art that works for me sometimes and doesn't work for me other times, I do think of Frank Quietly, and I do think of like John Romita Jr. And I'm just like, man, sometimes it hits and sometimes it just absolutely does not connect with me in any way. And this would be another artist to add to that, because I think he nails. I think some of his like backgrounds are really cool. I think he adds a lot of detail to his backgrounds. I think his backgrounds are fantastic. I think the way he sometimes draws Batman with his cape, like I said, is fantastic, and some of the trippy sequences are fantastic. But you're right, it's those moment to moment where people are just smiling and talking, which are kind of the most important to be able to do well, in a sense, that are just oof.
Yeah, then there's like tonally things that, like, I feel like he wanted to do a gag comic, like he wanted to do a funny Batman comic, and he got stuck on a relatively serious Batman comic. Like, when Batman's going around recruiting people, there's this moment where he's just kind of like... I feel like the script is Batman's hiding in a corner, and like behind a file cabinet, and the woman walks around and sees him. And then, like, you get the actual panel, and Batman's, like, squat in a fucking corner under a pipe, and there's, like, a bat just chilling from the pipe, and I'm like, why and how? How does no one see him right now? That is ridiculous.
There's a part where he's coming up behind a woman he wants to recruit, and he just, like, drops into a bush. He's just like, poof, I'm in this bush now. Yep. Like, you're just kind of like, huh. And then, like, Gordon goes to confront him in, like, the construction site or whatever, and it's this, like, big dramatic scene where Gordon's all ticked at him, and Batman's just, like, sitting there on, like, some wooden planks, and he's just like, oh, hi, Gordon. And he's just, like, sitting there with his, like, hands in his lap, and I'm just like, that's so... It's like watching a guy who's cosplaying Batman sitting down in between, like, walking to different panels at a con. Like, it's just... It looks so... weird.
Yeah, no, just like it's got all the right stuff for atmosphere, and then it's just like it seems like one of those things that, like, the writer just assumes the artist is gonna know how to do because they assume the artist has read a Batman comic before. It's like Gordon and Batman meet on top of a building that's under construction, and this is the scene, panel breakdowns. And the guy's like, okay, so yeah, he starts out on the girder. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. then he's like hanging upside down, getting the files from Gordon. Like, that's actually kind of a cool idea for a pose. But then he like kind of undercuts it by having the cape drape down naturally, which you know, you don't do that. And Batman's cape defies the laws of physics when it looks cool. And then he just like casually sits down in the next panel. That's a really great sequence to just describe how awkward this all looks. So I don't want to rag on anything too hard, but this is the one where I have the hardest time going back to this because, God, I do not like the art style here. And I mean, it's kind of unfair because we're comparing it to stuff that we've read that just has some of the best Batman art of all time. Like, no lie. So it's a hard one to go into. So let's get off the art for a little bit at least. What do you think of the story here? I guess we'll start with the... you want to start with Freeze?
I'd like to.
Okay. What do you think of the background that they give Freeze here?
Oh boy. I think Heart of Ice simultaneously saved and in an odd way destroyed Mr. Freeze. Mm-hmm. Because we have a hard time moving past Heart of Ice. And at the same time, while I do think Heart of Ice gives Mr. Freeze only so much leg room as a character, if you just go with the Heart of Ice backstory, you really only have, I think, so much you can do with that character. I have yet to read something that I find half as compelling as Heart of Ice at the end of the day. I have yet to find something that gives Mr. Freeze the genuine pathos as that story, that gives him just the simple but powerful motivation of that story. And every time we take Heart of Ice and we try to tell it with a twist, like his wife's actually dead, or Nora's not really his wife, just some woman he's obsessed with.
Oh God, Scott Snyder,
I'm just not into it. And so I hate to say it, because I get wanting to do something else with the character. I get wanting to take him in a direction that gives him more longevity as a villain. I get it. But I just can't get into this as a background for Mr. Freeze. I think there is something raw and emotional about a man who is trying to save the woman he loves and just slowly loses his humanity in the process, in the same way that Batman has made a vow to his dead parents and slowly losing, arguably, his humanity in the process. Mm-hmm. To do this, where we just kind of take that simple but emotional story and just make it to, well, he killed her on accident and now he's crazy. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but to be honest with you, I didn't care for this backstory, and I generally don't care for Heart of Ice stories, but with a twist. I generally don't care for them because I just don't think they're good most of the time. And that's kind of where I sat with it.
Yeah, like, it'd be one... Like, I really think that you could have made this work, like, this take work a lot better if we as the audience didn't know that his wife is dead until, like, the end, you know?
Yeah.
I think that could have played a lot better. The fact that he's like crazily hallucinating his wife or whatever is one thing. But if like he just pulled this frickin' popsicle waifu he just created out of the fucking machine and had been like, no, the ice, it froze you instantly. You're still alive in there, Nora. You're still alive. And, like, then it just kind of became the revenge subplot. Like, I'll be able to cure you, but first I've got to get a hold of all the research. And they'll, of course, try to stop me. But now I've got these ice powers. So I'm going to make them pay for what they did to my research and did to you. And, like, and then you just go through the whole story and you see that kind of degradation of the man. And then you get to this moment at the end where she breaks. Like, that could have been the moment. And then, like, it could have been cool because you would have had the ambiguity of, like, is she alive or was she alive or wasn't she? You know, like, you would have had that cool ambiguity there. And it also would have been a good way, because you mentioned Heart of Ice, and it's weird because Denny and company actually really don't like their follow-up with Freeze, where, you know, Nora gets cured and then she sees what a monster he's become and she's like, well, I'm not going to love you anymore. Bye. Um,
Yeah.
and that just like breaks his heart even more. I really like Dini and Ko's follow up where he's like, all right, fine, fuck it all. If I can't be happy, no one can. And I'm just going to force my depression on the rest of you. Like, I love that.
And I think that's not a bad place to go, yeah.
Yeah, and so you really could have gracefully slid into that from this. And just like, you ruined my one chance to save my wife. And now no one else will be happy. That'd be such a good fucking direction to go in for Mr. Freeze. And it's just like, you know, it's taking the idea of Batman and focusing on one aspect and, you know, twisting it in a funhouse mirror. So you mentioned, like, okay, the tragedy kind of, you know, creating this drive that's almost inhuman and kind of, you know, destroying the man and only leaving an idea. And so, but instead of Batman who's like wants to save, you just have Mr. Freeze now who wants to take away. I think that's got so much potential. And yeah, you're right. I don't love this. It's not the worst thing I've read with Mr. Freeze in it, though. But there's almost like a mythic power to Mr. Freeze. Were you on when we were talking about the like Grant Morrison Mr. Freeze thing?
Yeah, okay. You were telling me about that. How he kind of predicted that was going to happen.
Yeah, because I was recently reading Animal Man again, and that came out. That was reaching its end just as Batman the Animated Series was like starting to get its legs and stuff. And there's this chapter in Animal Man where he's walking into the white, into the narrative, and he's meeting all of the forgotten characters of comic books, the super pets and the wacky villains that were only used in one issue in like 1976, you know, like shit like that. And he keeps going and going into the void of whiteness, and he just eventually reaches this forgotten tundra. And standing alone in the tundra is Mr. Freeze, because he hadn't had a comic published in decades by that point. And he's like, I was one of Batman's most terrible villains. I was a threat. And one day, someone's going to use me, and I'll be back. And I will destroy Batman. And then, like, you know, just shortly after that, and you gotta wonder if this was, like, known and arranged, or if this just mythically happened. Shortly after that, Mr. Freeze comes back in Batman the Animated Series, and just, that's the character now. He's completely different. From that appearance on, everything else is a reaction to Batman the Animated Series take on Mr. Freeze, and it's better for it, but unfortunately he is pigeonholed into this. He really needs someone to come around and do what Alan Moore did with Swamp Thing. Where it's like, okay, well, he's not going to just fucking look for a cure forever. He finds Alec Holland's body. What? Just, you know, shit like that. I can't help but feel like that's exactly what Scott Snyder tried to do, now that I say it out loud. That is exactly what Scott Snyder tried to do.
Okay, well, we need someone to do it well.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's funny to me. I don't know. Maybe some writer has done this, and I'll just look stupid because I don't know my publication history all that well. But it's always been weird to me. I remember when I was playing the Arkham Knight Mr. Freeze DLC, and part of that story you actually wake up Nora because you kind of have to, because her cryonic chamber has been compromised, so you wake her up, and she gets out of the thing and she looks at you and she's like, Batman? And I'm just like, wait a minute. This happened not long enough ago that like Nora knows that Batman is a thing. And then it struck me, I'm just like, why is Mr. Freeze not like some sort of crazy scientist from the Cold War era? Why did this not happen? Like, why isn't he like some crazy scientist who came over after or before World War II, fell in love with a woman, and it's all experimental, like Cold War era science, and they've been like this for decades, and he's just been frozen in time for decades upon decades upon decades. Like, why have we never done that? That would be cool. That would be what I would
Batman
do.
White Knight.
Is he? But is he that old in Batman White Knight?
He's older. He's a Nazi scientist.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
pretty sure, at least. I'm pretty sure he's a Nazi scientist. I think they did like a one shot called Von Freeze. That's kind of like about Freeze's origin in White
that's
Knight.
Literally, like, if that's literally what I would do, is I would do like a Nazi scientist, because I only read White Knight once when it came out, and I remember he like gets unfrozen and like ages to how old he would be, and he's like pretty old, but I don't remember specifically what they did. But okay, so see, there you go. I look like an idiot. But
yeah. Fucking fake fan.
I know. This book did give us Batman on skis for like half a panel, and that made me smile. But
But it didn't give us an Arctic camo Batman suit.
It didn't. What do you think of Batman like assembling a team of civilians? Because I think that's kind of a cool idea, and that it just kind of falls apart because he's just like, I can't keep an eye on and train this many people.
Okay, so I want to address one thing real quick before I address that. So I'm particularly disappointed that we didn't get an Arctic camo Batman suit, because like you have the moment there for it, right? Where it's like, oh, they've left me something to wear that's gonna, negate Mr. Freeze's gun. Cool. Yeah. And then it's just like a gray cape. What a fucking letdown. Just goddamn. All right. Anyway, to your other point, I really fucking like that subplot so goddamn much. It's like so criminally underserved, because the complaint a lot of people have toward Batman, and it's usually a take in bad faith. It's one of those hot takes like, oh, Batman endangers children by taking them out to fight crime, and like, you don't fucking read Batman comics. Get out of here. You don't actually care about this. You're just trying to act like you're smarter than me. But like, I like taking that and exploring that in story, and the idea that like, oh no, he started with adults and it didn't work because they don't fucking listen, which, as someone who's worked a position in which I have to tell other people what to do at a job that they presumably want to be at, yeah, I kind of get it. Sometimes I think children would be easier. So, like, no, but I think it's interesting how it's played with. It's like, okay, I'll get this guy in as their security, so I don't have to worry about, swooping in to save him, and like, this guy will have these expertise, and this woman will have this expertise, and da-da-da-da-da. And so he's trying to supplement Batman. He's trying to be like, okay, they're putting it together almost as fast as I could if I were working on it, which frees me up to work on other stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. That's a really cool idea. So you just got like, you got that idea that Batman could do any of this, but he still is just one guy, and he would need to devote time to it that he just doesn't have. And so I thought it was just a really cool idea that he'd start with a crew. And I think it's an inspired choice to have the story be how that falls apart. Yeah. I absolutely love that. How, just these differing opinions and ideologies all just drag it down instantly. And I also really like how he puts the crew together in the most, like, CEO businessman kind of way of just giving them a frickin' card, Like, that's so cool.
It's great stuff. No, I love that subplot as well. I thought it was really neat. Because it makes so much sense. Like, why wouldn't Batman recruit people who kind of have this broad skill set that he can just kind of interact with as Batman? And he's like, there are people out there who crave something more, and I can give them that, and I can give them something to, direct their energies. I can provide some sense of purpose. And he even says that. He's like, this guy lacks a sense of whatever. I can give him what he wants, or I can provide that for them. It's so cool. But then, it's immediately like, but he's got this group of people that can become a liability, and that's exactly what happens, because it just completely falls apart on him. And that was probably my favorite part of this, because the Mr. Freeze stuff didn't really do it for me. but I liked the idea of this crew Batman assembles that just doesn't really work out for him.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I feel the same way. And that's, it's kind of interesting because I didn't think of it until we were just talking about it, but, like, assembling the crew that, like, each one of them is an expert in the thing. That's something we've kind of been doing just in general in superhero media since Batman Begins / The Dark Knight. Like, so much stuff has, like, kind of taken that formula of, all right, well, we want to make it believable, and we don't feel it's believable that one person could be an expert in all of these things, but, like, 2 or 3 people together could really manage that. And like, we've really run with that, because that's what, like, Arrow did, is you had, like, the Arrow team for a while, and, like, when they started out Flash, you had, like, the Flash team back at the lab, and, like, Cisco would do the calculations, and I forget her name, that turns into Killer Frost, would do the operations and stuff, and like, they certainly played with the formula, but, like, that seems to be a thing we do in superhero media now, but it's oddly, thankfully, hasn't translated to the comics as much. Like, we still just, in the comics, we just buy that Batman can be, an expert physicist, detective, and mathematician all at once, or whatever. Like, he can perfectly calculate all these things, and he can train other people to do it, too, all in his free time, and I kind of like that more.
I always wondered if part of it was just the necessity of the medium. Mm-hmm. Like, in a TV show, you need a cast of characters to have subplots and inter-party drama, and you need someone that he can be talking to, so because internal monologue just doesn't work on screen the way it works on the page. Mm-hmm. And so I always figured that was part of it. And I'd never minded the idea of Batman, like, I don't expect Batman to also be able to be, like, a mechanics expert, so the idea that he might rely on, like, Lucius Fox, or in the animated series he's got that, like, the dude who repairs his car. Like, I don't need my Batman to be able to do every single thing in the world. But I don't know that I could see Batman having, like, an Arrow-style crew for, like, any true length of time. And I think this book kind of hits on, in a very in-universe story kind of way, why that wouldn't even work anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also like the... again, this is kind of what we've been leading to in structuring the year. The year one story, is, like, slowly realizing that Batman needs help. Yeah. And, again, like, this is his first little play at it, and I really love the way that it ends with the, he's like, I don't know, it didn't quite work out. It had its chances, though. But I think I need someone that I can train from the beginning, so I don't have to deal with all the different conflicting personalities. And then you just see he's reading about the Flying Graysons touring the U.S. and stuff. Yep. And I'm like, that's so good. That is such a good little moment. That, seeding Robin like that, I think is such a cool idea. I'm not sure if I have much else I want to talk about with Snow.
I think...
Go ahead.
Oh, I think Mr. Freeze is a good villain. Even though I don't really like what is really done with Freeze in this, I still think he's a good villain to use for the same reason, that I thought he was a good villain to use for the first issue of Gotham Central, because Mr. Freeze is not your everyday threat. Like, it's not something that a normal person can deal with. He's a dude in a freeze suit with a freeze gun who can take out anybody. And so, like, for Batman to assemble this team and have them immediately go up against what is essentially one of Batman's most physically dangerous opponents, I think is a really good, like, this is a trial by fire for this team, and they just can't.
But by ice.
Yeah, but it's by cold. And it works for the same way that it worked in the first issue of Gotham Central, because it just sets the, like, yeah, fuck, like, how are these people going to do anything against Mr. Freeze?
Yeah, I like him as a threat. don't like his design in this very much. It's kind of a letdown.
Like the suit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Freeze suit, I'm at odds with how much I want it to look kind of old school, and like, because sometimes when we do the Freeze suit, it looks very, I'm trying to think of a better word, but kind of like almost out of like Flash Gordon, very like old-timey, and sometimes I like that, sometimes I don't. I think the Freeze suit is one of the most inconsistently designed things in Batman media. And sometimes it airs on the super big, mechanical, bulky side, like in the Arkham games. Sometimes it's kind of more like this, where it's almost like an astronaut suit. I don't mind it too badly here. I like the color palette. I like the light blue with kind of the purplish blue. I don't mind the fishbowl head, the scuba
I don't like
tank.
The beads
it's
on
not...
the arms. The beads on the arms feel weird to me. I don't know what they're there for, and they just it's too busy. And like then he's got like padding that looks like quilting material or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just looks weird. I liked it to look like very clearly mechanical in some way, shape, or form. How far you go with that, whether you go like sleek and futuristic, or you go something that looks more like clunky, maybe like steampunk kind of vibes coming off of it.
Yeah.
That's up to the artist. I don't like the idea that there's any kind of fabric on it. That's weird to me.
Especially because a lot of times when we make it mechanical, we make it something that actually makes him physically stronger, and you can't really do that with a fabric, and you also can't make it like vaguely bulletproof either, so it does kind of diminish how much of a threat he is physically, and that's kind of sometimes the whole point of what we do with Mr. Freeze. I always really liked his season 4 animated series look, the really sleek one, and
with the
like
fucking,
honestly,
like spider robot legs out the head and shit.
Well, yeah, you've got that, of course, but the I still think we have yet to top his 2 animated series designs.
Oh,
which
I mean,
kind of
certainly.
Which kind of makes sense given that that's where he comes from. But yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It's a suit that I don't hate it. I've seen worse costumes for Mr. Freeze, but it's not super great either.
The Batman redesign I liked quite a bit. I just wish they went with a gun instead of ice blasts out the hands. That series confused the shit out of me for the longest time. I thought Mr. Freeze had like legit freeze powers.
The Batman is so influential to me in a lot of different ways that I didn't really think about until fairly recently. That Freeze design is cool. It's just kind of colored by how much I find him kind of boring in that show.
No, I mean their take on Mr. Freeze is garbage. Absolute horse garbage. Okay. All right. Anything else to talk about with Snow, or we want to go ahead and go on to ratings?
No, not a ton else to say.
All right. Did you have a favorite member of the gang that he puts together?
I'm blanking on the name, but the guy with the shaved head with the tattoo of an arrow pointing backwards, who's like super militant and just wants to fucking go hard. I liked him a lot.
Okay. All right.
He amused me.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It's I guess that's maybe a complaint I have for as much, like, I kind of felt bad. I thought these books were both shorter. I thought they were like 4 issues max, not 5 issues. For as much time as we spend with the crew here, we don't really get a great sense of any of them. A lot of their shit just seems to happen off panel. And so this book's juggling a lot, but I don't know. I guess I see that as a little bit less of a problem because it did take me this long to kind of vocalize that, because it was like, do I have a favorite? No, because they're all pretty bland.
They are. I think that this type of story of Batman toys around with the idea of creating a crew of civilians, I think that's a story that could be told over several arcs. And then, like, if this was a TV show, that would be like a whole season of them being a crew until the end of till the season finale when it all falls apart. I think you could flesh this out even more and maybe do that and actually make the characters a little bit more interesting as individuals. But I also think that the story pretty effectively communicates what it's trying to communicate about Batman himself without necessarily having to flesh out those characters. So
yeah, in particular with the character that like loses a fucking arm by the end of the story, and then it's like almost nothing's done with that. That's the crazy part to me. It's like she loses an arm, and then like 2 panels later, the story is over. For her, at least. That was a weird choice.
Well, I mean, the whole book just sort of ends very abruptly. Like he like hears Nora, he jumps off the building, he lands in the river, and then we have like 2 more pages and it's over. You're just kind of like, oh, well, okay.
Yep. Yeah. A lot of these seem to have that problem. For 5 issues, that is a little oddly paced, I guess. All right, let's go ahead and go on to ratings. What will you rate Prey?
I will rate Prey 4 Sega Genesis Ninjas out of 5. I think the art is overall really evocative. I think it has a lot of kind of interesting things to say about the psychology of Batman. I think it's held back by some kind of weird decisions, but overall it felt very classic Batman, and I very much enjoyed it. All
right. For me, I'm going to go with... I agree with you completely. I'm going to go with 4 out of 5 sex dolls.
Nice.
It is really good. It does really have its moments. I think it is a little emblematic of the time that it came out. It seems like we're doing less Batman origin or like stuff around Batman's early days now for whatever reason. We kind of just... I guess we just have the Bat family now and are really excited to use them poorly. So, yeah, I guess, I don't know, part of me kind of wishes that we do more early days Batman stuff and with more modern sensibilities, but I don't know. For the time that it came out, it's got its problems, but not a ton of them, so I quite enjoyed it. How about Snow? What will you rate Snow?
I'll give Snow 3 out of 5 Batman skis. Snow is a book that brought me a lot of interesting things to think about with the idea of Batman assembling a crew and all that good stuff. And the art, as much as I don't like it sometimes, I respect that it's just kind of, it's a very unique style, and it does occasionally give me these very cool big set piece moments of these incredible backgrounds. I think the art does have some legit points where it hits, and I'm just like, wow, that looks really cool. Or just really interesting. But overall, I still think the story is pretty bogged down by a weak Mr. Freeze origin, and the art isn't consistent enough for me to really praise it as being one of the selling points. So I'm probably going to do 3 out of 5.
Okay.
3 out of 4.
Yeah, no, it's out of 5. It's out of 5. Okay. All right, so... Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I hate to just give the exact same score, so I'm going to give a 2.99 out of 5. Frozen off arms that for some reason freeze off, even though the exact same thing happened to Batman's feet, and those didn't freeze off, so...
And he just runs like he's wearing boots.
So, defuck, man. Defuck. I don't know, maybe they brought that character back as, like, a villain at some point. That'd be one hell of a villain origin, I'll give it that. Alrighty. That's going to do it for this episode. Next week, we talk about the Big Granddaddy. We're going to talk about Batman Long Halloween. Everyone, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Until then, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the Sonic Erotica Lover.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.